So today we're going to be showing you how to use your leftover St. Patty's Day corned beef and make it into another kind of one pot wonder meal for the whole family. So we're going to make corned beef, like what would be normally corned beef hash or something, but we're going to turn it into a pot pie. So for starters, we have to make pie dough. So this is what I imagine this is stuff that most people have laying around the house during their quarantine days. So this is, I'm making a thyme pastry dough for this. The thyme's completely unnecessary. You can flavor it with whatever herb, whatever you want. Just make sure you chop it up fine enough that it doesn't cause gaps in your dough. So we'll start with all of our dry ingredients. So it's flour, the thyme, salt, and sugar. Get that properly mixed together. So then, I just pulled this out of the freezer. This is your unsalted butter that you're gonna add. That is, it's cubed up pretty small already, and you want to cut this into into the dry ingredients. And the reason you cut it in is you want to leave it relatively large, kind of rustic chunks. Like you want to cut it to like the size of a pea into your dough. And the reason for that is if you smear it in like using a paddle or like stirring it in with a wooden spoon or something like that, and it doesn't give you like the nice pockets give you your rise and your leavening without having to use any kind of yeast or baking powder or anything like that. So if you want like a nice flaky pie dough, this is the way to go. I'm doing this by hand. This can easily be done in a food processor with a blade attachment on it. It actually comes out really well and is much easier. I unfortunately don't have one of those, so we're going to do it this way. So once you have your butter all cut in, you want it to be kind of like I said, the size of a pea. So if you want to take a look at what that's supposed to look like, it's still pretty dry. So at this point, you're going to add your water. I've measured out about 100 milliliters for this. It's a little bit more than I think I'm going to need. And you kind of just want to add it gradually. You also want it to be ice cold. Like I actually started this off as ice water. And let it kind of melt down. The colder this water is, the better. Like your dough's easier to manipulate when it's colder. It helps keep that butter nice and chunky and keeps it from melting into your dough and smearing, which would ruin all that hard work you just did hand cutting it in. So you're gonna add some of it. I'm not gonna add all of it, and I'm gonna kind of mix it by hand until it starts to form a dough together. The reason I don't add all of it is because obviously you can always add, but you can never take away. So it's easier to kind of add it gradually until you get it where you want it to be. And you want this to be a relatively loose dough, like it should be just holding itself together. And nice and kind of crumbly, and that'll help give you a nice flaky pie dough. I'm gonna go just a splash more in there. So now that I've got to this point that it'll actually clump in my hands, now I'm gonna try and roll it out. Okay, so once you get it formed to a nice kind of block like this, to the point that you can kind of keep it homogeneous, you'll get a little flour down on your bench. And a bit on top as well. It just helps keep your rolling pin and the table from sticking to your dough. And then this isn't a laminated dough. You're not making like puff pastry or croissant or something like that here. So you don't want to do turns. You're really just trying to kind of get it into a uniform block. The rolling helps kind of get all that together so that you don't have such a, that's kind of what I meant about the flour there. Put a bit more down on the, but that'll help keep this together so that it's not completely coming apart on you. And then at that point, just give it a fold. Make sure you're not sticking. And once it gets to this point that you've got it together, you can take your whole dough and just kind of wrap it in plastic, and you'll get it nice and chilled. You'll refrigerate it for about an hour before you roll it out to make your pie dough. The reason you do that is, one, it being nice and cold makes it easier to work with. And also, I've been agitating this so much that it's developed all that gluten in the flour and it's getting really stiff and harder to work with. So if you relax it for an hour, it makes your life a lot easier in terms of rolling it out. All right, so next we have to make our filling. So to start this off, I have all of our kind of chunky veggies that we're gonna go in with. So we have a nice kind of hearty pie. So we're gonna go large dice on carrot, onion, and then sliced garlic. That's all gonna get cooked together and sweated off together. And then we'll add in our leftover corned beef. I've taken the liberty of rendering and straining off all of that liquid that we cooked the corned beef in, because that's going to have all of that flavor and everything that you have left over, and that'll be kind of like the sauce base for your pie filling. Also some potatoes, which I went significantly lighter on than you normally would on something like this, just because I personally like to go a bit veggie heavy, especially with the pie crust and all that. It helps it keep from being like too heavy, too starchy, too many carbs. So we're going to start off cooking off the veg. So you remember your beef is already cooked at this point, so you're not really worried about browning that off or anything of that nature. So you're just going to kind of sweat down all of your veg initially to break it down and break all those kind of juices and flavors out and let it. You want to kind of build it in layers. So you'll sweat all your veg, you'll throw in your beef, you'll let that cook down a little bit, you'll throw in your potatoes, you'll let that cook down a little bit, you'll throw in your stock and let the whole thing simmer with the cabbage and let it all kind of come together. If you have leftover cabbage, throw it in there. It's not typical for a pot pie, but since we're doing a corned beef pie, I mean, why not? All right, so welcome back to Shelter at Home. And so as you can see, we've got all of our veg, all of our corned beef, our cabbage, everything has been cooked down. I just stirred in about 2 tablespoons of butter. That's going to mix in with all of that fat that renders off of the meat, all of that kind of natural oils and of the veggies and stuff themselves, and what the oil that you use to begin with to cook all of your vegetables. So the reason I want all that is because I need something that's going to stick to and cook this flour that I'm going to add. And the reason I'm adding this flour is because I want to get this in there and get it to really coat everything and really mix with all those oils and fats so that they emulsify together. And then that as this goes, the flour will cook. We want that flour to cook a little bit just so that like your filling doesn't taste super chalky and floury. And this is before I add the liquid in, because you want, right now, if I were to just do this as is, that's a pretty dry filling. You want that like nice creamy filling, but the only way to get that without it being this watery soup underneath your pie is to basically make a roux to thicken the stock that you're going to add. So I'm going to cook all of this in for about 30 seconds or so and let it really, like, stir constantly, let it really coat everything that's in there before I add our drippings from the corned beef. The other thing you'll notice is that I haven't put any salt in this as of yet, as I've been cooking. And typically when you're making a soup or a broth or something like this, or it's like a chunky thing like this, you'll add a bit of salt on each layer as you cook it. But in this case, since I'm adding what's already like salt cured beef that was cooked in this broth, which has that salt has leached out into, I want to wait and season at the very end so that I can control how I want this to be. Because if I throw a bunch of salt in here and then throw this in there and I taste it and it's way too salty, there's not a lot I can do with it at that point. It's like we talked about earlier with the water and the pastry dough. You can always add, but you can never take away. So now that this is nice and cooked in, I'm going to add my stock. And I'm going to do this kind of gradually like I did everything else, because I don't want this to be soupy. I want it to be moist and thick, but I want it to be like a pie filling that'll stand up on its own. That isn't going to be like I don't want it to be a soup or a broth. Another 20 seconds or so and it should be done. Once I take it off, I'm going to pour it. I'm going to put like a bowl on top of a bowl of ice water so that I can rapid cool this down as fast as I possibly can. On your filling, you want it to be fully cooked and ready to go. You want it to taste now the way it's going to taste in the pie, because you're really worried when you finally throw it in the oven, you're really just worried about how long it takes to bake the pie crust. And this is just warming up in there. Because if you're trying to cook vegetables or cook potatoes or finish this in the oven somehow, then it's really, really difficult to get that timing right of having that like perfectly baked golden crust and having everything in there cooked through. You're better off just worrying about getting your pastry proper when you put it in the oven and having this done. All right, so now once your filling's nice and chilled, you have your pie dish, and then this is what's called a pie well. It's something that kind of you're going to set in the center here that'll help you vent your pie so that when all of this filling inevitably starts to steam as this is cooking, there's somewhere for the steam to go and it doesn't just completely burst your pie shell open at the top. If you don't, I know a lot of people don't have one of these. If you don't have one of them, that's fine. Once you've rolled out your dough, you can take just a little cutter and just cut a little hole in the center. You can do it by hand or use a shot glass as a guide or anything like that. That works just as well. So we're going to start with our pie well in the middle, and we're going to take our filling and just kind of fill in around it. Thank you, Pilo. Thank you for letting me know that I was filling that up too high. In case anyone's wondering, this is my 4-month-old puppy barking at me right now because she's upset that none of this is going to her at the moment. So we're going to try to get this as even as possible so that we have a nice like flat surface to lay our pie dough over. And that's it, we're ready to roll out our dough. Now that we've got our pie filling all nice and chilled and ready to go, our pie dough is nice and cold now. You can see the little kind of flecks of, it's nice and homogeneous, you can see the kind of little flecks of time going through it. This is gonna be a lot of dough, so I'm gonna take that in half and kind of roll it out from there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to roll this a little bit larger than the size of the actual baking dish. So we don't need to worry too much about this aspect of it being perfectly round or anything like that, because we're going to trim it to size once we get there anyways. So just kind of start rolling it out, and the thickness you're going for is like you want it to be thin enough that it will, that in the time that it takes for it to brown on top, it'll bake through and won't be this kind of raw, doughy bit in the middle. But you also need it like thick enough that it will actually stand up to the filling and everything's underneath it, and not give you just this big soggy crust on top. So we'll get this nice and rolled out. So you're going for like probably 1/8 of an inch or so. You want to make sure you have plenty of clearance on your actual pie. Middle, that's going to help vent this dough and is going to help me fit it over that pie well in the center. It'll also give me a little bit of a guide as to where I'm going to try to lay this over. So I'm going to start, I'm just going to lay my dough and fit that right around that little bit right around the well. So I have my cute little bird in the middle, and then just kind of run it around the edge till you have it nice and defined around the edge of your pan. And then if you want to have the nice like clean scalloped edges, just run one of these along the outside, and it'll take right to the shape of the pie tin itself. You want to make sure you've really got this nicely on there, because this is, as the butter melts and this bakes, it is going to spring back a little bit. So you want to make sure you've really got it on there so that it's not going anywhere on the top of your dish. All right, so one fun thing I like to do is all of that trim that we just took off the outside of that dough. And it seems a shame to waste all of it. So what we're going to do is we're going to knead it all together so that it's nice and homogeneous on our floured board here. And then roll it out again. And then you can do this by hand and do whatever you like. You can do, if you have like fun cutters for the holidays or something like that that you want to do, you can go for it. But what I like to do is I have these little leaves that are like a punch out thing here, so you can make any kind of decorative thing you want on the top of your dough. One, it just gives you, it looks really pretty, it's a fun kind of thing to put out, and on top of that, it gives you a little bit of extra pie crust, and who doesn't want a little bit of extra pie crust? So we're going to cut some of these lovely leaves out of the excess dough that we had, and use those to decorate the top of our crust. All right, so now, as you'll see, we've got the pie dough on and all of our little decorative topping. And then the sheen you're seeing on top is an egg wash. So it's just an egg yolk with a splash of, by splash, I mean like a tablespoon of, not even a tablespoon, like a teaspoon of water in with it. Mix it together well, and then just brush it over the top. Make sure you're brushing as evenly as humanly possible. So once you have this nice and evenly brushed like this, you're gonna take it and go straight into your oven. I have this preset to 375. Middle rack so that it makes nice and even. And we'll check that in a bit. All right, so this is about 45 minutes in at 375, and we are looking pretty spot on. We've got good color on all the extremities. The main dough looks like it's cooked through. You can hear it kind of bubbling, so you know that the filling is done. It's looking pretty nice. Yeah. Here's our finished pie. It's looking pretty nice. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope this is a nice, fun way that you guys can use up leftovers and just roll a little pastry. If you guys have any further questions after I post this, please feel free to ask me any questions. I'm CHRRICK. And yeah, I hope you guys are getting through your quarantine okay, and I hope this helps. Thank you.